Hello and welcome to part 2 in a series of videos that I'm putting out this week where I break down all the fights taking place this weekend at UFC 237 from a betting perspective. Now I've already covered 3 fights which you can find in part 1 of this video. I will leave a link to that video in the description below and I recommend checking it out because it covers how I see the fight between Jessica Andrade and Rose Namajunas from a betting perspective. Now before we jump into the 3 fights that I want to cover in today's video, I want to remind you that if every single video that I put out this week gets 300 likes, I will do a bonus video that I'll put out on Saturday breaking down Bellator 221 from a betting perspective, and that is a very, very good Bellator card. Remember that Michael Chandler takes on Pitbull in the main event, and the co-main event is even more exciting with Douglas Lima taking on Michael Venom Page. So if you want that bonus breakdown video, you have to hit the like button below. Please smash the like button, and if every video parts 1, 2, 3 and 4 in this series, if they all get 300 likes, I will do that on Saturday. But yesterday's video part 1 was very, very long, so I don't want to go on any further. I just want to get straight into these fights. So let's talk about the first fight that I want to cover, which is Melissa Gallo against Talita Bernardo. Now Melissa Gallo is stepping up to take this fight on just a few weeks' notice. I think it's around about just over a week's notice against Talita Bernardo, which is a tough task. As we know, a massive percentage of fighters that make their UFC debut lose, and an even bigger percentage of the fighters that make their debut lose when they take the fight on short notice. And that's obviously reflected in the odds here because Talita Bernardo is a massive favourite. If we look at her odds at the moment, she's currently around about a 1.20 favourite, which is minus 500 for an implied probability of 83%. So to be able to bet Bernardo here, you really have to give her sort of an 88% or better chance of winning. Now, we don't know anything about Melissa Gatto because this is her UFC debut. So let's jump right in and take a look at some footage from her. So, what is interesting before we go into taking a look at what Gatto brings to the table is that you very rarely see a fighter like Talita Bernardo at these kind of odds, because in order for a fighter to command these type of odds, it means that they've got to be virtually bulletproof. You know, having an implied probability of 83% means that in order to bet them, they have to pretty much have no way to lose. And you rarely see Talita Bernardo, fighters like Talita Bernardo at odds like this, because let's face it, she's got very low level striking, she's got bad fight IQ, and her cardio is also questionable. So why have the bookies capped her at such a big favourite? And interestingly, they actually didn't. When the odds first came out, she was around about 1.67, which was minus 149, but since her odds have got absolutely steamed, the public have bet her in a big way, and now she is obviously a massive favourite. But she has got weaknesses, she's not bulletproof, so let's get into finding out what chances Gatto has got of causing an upset here. So if we take a look at her fight against Caroline Rosa, which took place back in September, we can just start to see a little bit of what Gatto brings to the table. So early on in this fight, you'll see Gatto in the black here, and you will see her giving up an easy takedown very, very shortly into this fight. Her opponent, Rosa, drives in on a very, very nice deep double leg takedown, and she uses her trip. She uses, I believe, her right foot to trip Gatto and complete the takedown. Here you see she shoots in on Gatto, connects her hands together on a double leg takedown, and then Gatto does a good initial job of stuffing it, but Rosa is able to get her, actually it's her left leg behind Gatto to complete the trip there. Now, obviously, we just saw Gatto give up a pretty weak takedown very early on to this matchup, but we've also got to bear in mind that this fight is being contested in a ring. It would have been much easier to stuff that double leg takedown entry in a cage, because obviously you can create a wide base against the cage and make it much more difficult for your opponents to connect their arms together around your body or around your legs and complete that takedown. So we can't be too harsh on Gatto here. It's a lot tougher to stuff those kind of takedowns in a ring than it is in a cage. And then if we go a little bit deeper on into the fight, up until around about this point, after these girls disengage from the clinch position here, you can see again Gatto forced to defend another deep takedown attempt. Her opponent drives into her here, tries to go for the exact same type of technique, a double leg takedown where she shoots in deep on Gatto's hips to connect her hands around her body, be able to pick her up and complete that takedown. But this time you see exactly what we were talking about a few moments ago, where Gatto's able to create a really wide base against the ropes. It's much easier to do this against a cage because the cage is obviously a sturdy, rigid object. It's a good base for you to put your body weight on and be able to use the cage to defend the takedown. Much harder with ropes, but here Gatto does a much better job of creating the wide base with the ropes, getting that underhook in play on the left side and stuffing the takedown initially, but then obviously her opponent drove through and completed the takedown. But just there you can see that she knows the correct technique she used. She did create a wide base. She did get that left underhook in play early, but obviously against ropes, very, very difficult to defend takedowns of that nature. So let's go on to another fight now and show you some different sides to Gatto, I guess. This fight is against Kathleen Rothenberg, which took place back in April of 2018, so almost exactly 1 year ago. And in this fight we see a very different side to Gatto. Again, she's wearing the black here, and instead of being on the receiving end of the takedowns, here we can see very early on into this matchup, Gatto chooses to try and take this fight to the ground, so doesn't waste any time, ducks under on her own double leg takedown, but she's shot in quite high above her opponent's hips, so she was forced to transition and chain into the body lock takedown instead, which she does manage to get very, very nicely. Now, there was an opportunity as they hit the ground there for her opponent to actually explode in the top position and take this top position, but I think the ring here kind of prevented her from doing it, and on the ground Gatto was faster to react and actually corrected the sloppy takedown and jumped into half guard. Now, there's not too much that I want to show you in this fight. Gatto just keeps advancing position on the ground from half guard, defends an armbar there, postures up, eventually back into half guard, slowly transitions into the mount position. As you can see there, she takes mount there, and then after a short period of time in mount, she just goes aggressively for the armbar and gets a finish. So just wanted to show you that fight because the first fight that I showed you from quite recently, the fight took place between Rosa, back in September, only 7 months ago, or it was at the end of September, so it was 6 months ago. But in that fight, we saw, we saw Gatto being taken down and controlled on the ground and struggling. But that fight indicated that, she's not opposed to shooting her own takedowns and mixing things up on the ground. It's not like she's a pure striker out of her depth. Or is she? Because this fight against Sidi Rocha from back in July 2018, which is just under 1 year ago, this fight, even though the quality of the video is very poor, it actually tells us a lot more about Gatto than the other two fights did. So in the beginning, again, Gatto starts this fight against Rocha exactly like she started the last fight that I showed you against Rothenberg, by going in for a takedown very early on. And here we can see, again, she shoots in on a double leg takedown. She can't get it because she's too high above her opponent's hips, but she's able to use the trip takedown technique to complete the takedown and wind into top position. But then look what happens. Remember in the last fight where we said it was a sloppy takedown entry that gave her opponent an opportunity to explode in the top position. That window of opportunity was created because Gatto gave her opponent too much space when they hit the ground. She didn't stay tight enough, didn't have full control of her opponent when they hit the ground, and that gave her last opponent a window of opportunity to scramble into top position. But as it happens, Gatto reacted faster when they were on the ground, and Gatto was able to get into half guard. That doesn't happen here. As they hit the ground, watch, Gatto actually gets reversed and winds up on the bottom, which is a sign of very low level wrestling. Not good at all from Gatto. We can see her then in top position and struggling. And we can also see for the, the next few minutes in this fight, Gatto's just quite weak off her back. Doesn't really attack with that many submissions. We can see her opponent's been able to advance into half guard here. And Gatto pretty much just gets dominated from top position, which isn't a good sign because we've seen her initiate the grappling. She went for the takedown. Then she got reversed as soon as they hit the ground. It's not the first time we saw this happen. It also happened during the last fight, except she got away with it. She didn't get reversed, even though she gave her opponent the space to do it. So then if we skip ahead a bit further on into the fight, Gatto just gets controlled a lot. Doesn't really make much of an attempt to get back to her feet. And then if we go to the beginning of the second round, we can see that Gatto does look very fragile standing. Remember, again, she's in the black and white shorts here and just doesn't look confident standing at all. Her opponent's walking her down. She looks very nervous, doesn't really have that much power in her hands, just being caught off balance. Shoots a really desperate single leg takedown there, and her opponent pretty much falls into a very, very bizarre takedown that she was able to get there, but it just shows the low level of opponent that she has been facing. But here you can see how low level and fragile she is on the ground. Somehow she manages to get that takedown. Not quite sure how it happened, but again, in just a few moments, even though she's managed to get into top position, you'll see very easily her opponent reverses her and puts her on her back. This is not a good sign. This is now the third time we have seen Gatto get into a dominant position and either give up an easy reversal or come very close to giving up an easy reversal. And again, Gatto's on her back. And then what we can see if we skip a little bit further on is eventually Gatto does work her way back to her feet. And again, or goes to work her way back to her feet if we look here. So she's in a position here on her knees when she can either, she's got two options from this position. She can either just choose to stand back up and explode to her feet, or she can choose to move closer to the cage so that she can then get her back tight to the cage to protect herself from her opponent taking her back, and then she can use the cage to wall walk and stand back up. But what she actually does is try and shoot in on kind of her own single leg and winds up getting reversed again for the fourth time. Sign of a very, very low level ground game indeed. And then again, more top control until the referee eventually separates them and labels Gatto to get back up. And at this point in the fight, again, you can see very, very low level striking on display from Gatto in this next sequence. We can see her opponent is clearly tired here. She's taking some big deep breaths, but Gatto's not really able to make her pay. She's certainly not very convincing standing. It's a big right hand there. Her opponent clearly tired, but look at these, slow, sloppy, low level strikes from Gatto. Certainly not very dangerous standing. I know these girls probably aren't getting paid very much. I know they can't afford to live good or eat good or train good at this stage in their career, which is going to be having an effect on their sharpness and cardio. But with Gatto taking this fight against Bernardo this weekend on short notice, and with this fight taking place, literally less than a year ago, I would imagine that this version of Gatto is very similar to what we're going to see Saturday night at UFC 237. So then the final just little thing I want to show you, if we just skip a bit further on into the fight, to around about this point in the fight, we can see again Gatto gives up an easy takedown any second now. We can see it coming up here. Her opponent drives her into the cage. And I wanted to show you that just because the first fight that I showed you showed Gatto using, in that second defend of the takedown where she created a wide base against the cage, and at least showed with the way she tried to create a wide base and got that left underhook in play early, that she knew how to defend takedowns, and that it was possible that when we saw her competing in a cage, her takedown defense might have been much better. But here we can see her give up an easy takedown. And even though the cage is easier to defend takedowns in, she still gave up a weak takedown, just like she did in the ring. And then the very, very final thing I want to show you is in the third round. At any second now, we will see Gatto give up another very, very easy takedown here. Just gets body lock thrown to the ground. So that is basically Melissa Gatto in a nutshell. And we have to remember, everything that I've just shown you shows that Gatto has very, very average striking. I mean, average is probably being kind to her. It's probably below average. She has a very low level ground game. You know, she gets reversed very easily. I mean, I know she hit a nice armbar submission after advancing into mounting one of the girls that I showed you footage of, but we have to question what level of grappling that girl was at. And at the same time, we now have to remember that even though Talito Bernardo has bad fight IQ, low level striking herself, and also questionable cardio, and isn't usually the type of fighter that would command and deserve having big odds like this, one thing that Talito Bernardo does well is that she is a strong wrestler. She does have a very nice reactive double leg takedown. She does have a heavy top game. And based on what I've just shown you from Melissa Gatto, that's probably all you need in order to win. So while these odds do look very, very steep, I think they're justified. You know, if we look at the average odds on Bernardo at the moment, 1.20, which is minus 500 for an implied probability of 83%. You know, to give her any chance, to get any value on her here, you have to give her an 88% or better chance of winning. I can't get there. I'm not interested in betting her because with a bet like this, you know, if you just place this kind of bet, right, if you do 100 divided by 20, which is her current odds, shows you that in order to just break even on these kind of bets, you have to win 5 of them, and you can't afford to take a loss. If you lose 1 in 5, you're at a loss. You have to literally win 6 of these kind of bets to get in any kind of profit, and that's just not the kind of situation I think is smart to put your money in. You know, I'm not opposed to betting fighters at these odds, but in order to bet a fighter at these odds, they have to be absolutely bulletproof, and in my opinion, Bernardo isn't bulletproof because of her cardio issues, because of her low-level striking and bad fight IQ. You never know. She could put herself in a bad position and Gatto could hit a Hail Mary submission. Significantly unlikely based on what we've seen, but all the same, not the type of bet that I would be interested in placing on someone like Bernardo at those odds. The risk is just not worth the reward. Now, the next fight that I want to talk about in today's video is Laureano Staropoli versus Thiago the Pitbull Alves, the second Pitbull to be fighting this weekend. Of course, no relation, but we have another Pitbull headlining Bellator 221, which goes head-to-head with the UFC on Saturday night. It's a big shame. I hate it when they put their events on at the same time. It makes it difficult to watch them, but what can you do? What can you do? So, generally speaking, the vast majority of fighters that make their UFC debut don't actually look that great. It takes them a little while until they get comfortable competing under the bright lights of the UFC, and it takes them a while before we see their best. But Laureano Staropoli's only fought once in the UFC against Hector Aldana, and he really hit the ground running. He looked great in his UFC debut. I was very impressed with him, and at 26 years old, he's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. And this is the reason why this fight is a little difficult to judge, because Staropoli looked amazing in his UFC debut against Hector Aldana, and now that he's got experience of competing under the bright lights of the UFC for the first time, and with him being so young, I would expect him to look even better in this fight against Thiago Alves, even though it's a lot of pressure fighting against a popular Brazilian fighter in a big arena in Rio in front of lots of Brazilian fans on a big pay-per-view event. I just think that I think Staropoli could show up looking really good, but there's still a lot that we don't know about him. But what we do know from his last fight against Hector Aldana is that he's very tough, he's very aggressive, he hits very hard, he goes for the kill if he senses he has his opponents hurt, and he also appears to have legit power in his hands, and he also seems to be pretty tough as well. Now, I also like that he's fearless and very confident, because he's going to need to be fearless and confident going up against a fighter like Thiago Alves that is a legend of the sport. Extremely tough, extremely durable, still at 35 years old with almost 40 pro fights. His chin is still there. Thiago Alves is the kind of guy that you have to practically kill in order to beat, and he doesn't mind getting sucked into a war, which is interesting because Staropoli's very aggressive, doesn't like to take a backward step, loves to stand in the pocket and exchange bombs and get aggressive, and Alves will absolutely oblige him. Alves isn't taking a backward step. If Staropoli wants a war, Alves will be more than happy to go to war. But this is obviously a tough matchup for Staropoli, because Thiago Alves is a massive step up in competition. He's also a very popular Brazilian fighter, and he'll have home advantage on his side for this matchup, which is huge. I mean, he fought Max Griffin in his last fight at UFC on ESPN Plus 2. He won a split decision, but I feel like he pretty clearly lost that fight. But as we know, home advantage is huge, so Staropoli can't afford to leave this fight in the hands of the judges. If it does go the distance, Staropoli's going to have to make sure that he absolutely dominates this fight, because Alves, this fight, he's a very popular Brazilian fighter. It's taking place on the main card. He cannot give you the judges an opportunity to rob you. Now, this is a very complicated fight to cap, because Thiago Alves has been in a lot of wars. He's not that old at 35 years old, but he's been around forever at 40 pro MMA fights, and a large percentage of these fights have been absolute wars. If we just look back over his recent matchups, the Max Griffin fight was a war. He took tons of damage against Kunchenko, got knocked out badly against Melenda. The fight against Jim Miller was contested at a very high pace. He took tons of damage against Carlos Condit. His nose was basically crushed in. So all these wars, all these battles, all these injuries are going to start to catch up with him at some point, and you never know when that's going to be. Father Time can come knocking, and you can decline very, very fast, particularly when a fighter has had this many fights and this many wars. I mean, like I say, Alves is only 35 years old, but he may as well be 135 years old. Now, based on the recent performances of Laureano Staropoli against Hector Aldana, I do think Alves can make this fight competitive, but what I'd be worried about here is that Staropoli may show up and look much better in this fight than he did in his UFC debut against Aldana, because you'd expect the octagon jitters competing under the bright lights of the UFC to have negatively affected his performance. I'd expect him to be better this weekend, and at the same time with Thiago Alves you'd expect him to be declining. So in Staropoli we've got a guy who should be looking even better on Saturday, and Alves a guy that should be declining. But again, Staropoli is facing a huge step up in competition here. Thiago Alves is still good enough to hang with high level guys like Kunchenko and go the distance with him. Still tough enough, and his chin's still intact to eat some big shots off a guy like Max Griffin and go to war with him for 3 rounds. So for me, this is a very tough fight to predict. I am struggling to cap this fight because I don't exactly know what we're going to get from either guys. I do think there's a good chance Staropoli immeasurably improves and looks better than he did against Aldana, which makes this a very difficult fight to cap. So if we look at the odds at the moment, Staropoli is currently around about a 1.91 favourite, which is minus 110 for an implied probability of 52%. And if we look at the odds on Thiago Alves, he's roughly about the same, so 1.91 minus 110 for 52%. So the bookies are basically capping this as a 50-50 fight, and I agree with them. I think that's absolutely spot on. I'm really struggling to cap this fight because I think the Staropoli's the better boxer, but I think Thiago Alves has the better kicks. Alves has the vicious body kicks, the vicious leg kicks. It's also a big step up in competition for Staropoli. And while he did look good in his UFC debut against Aldana, maybe it will get to him fighting against a popular Brazilian on a big Brazilian pay-per-view card on the main card. Maybe it will get to him in some way. Who knows? And as we know, Alves, the kind of guy you have to practically kill in order to finish. So I don't know if Staropoli's ready for that kind of war. We don't know enough about him yet. Based on his first fight in the UFC, I think he can make this competitive, but I'm totally clueless on this fight. I don't know how to cap it. It's an easy pass for me. I'm just not interested in betting this matchup. And now we move on to the final fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is the co-main event between Gerard Cannonier and Anderson the Spider Silva. Now this fight is a fight that was very similar to how I capped, or I guess not how I capped Al Iaquinta versus Donald Cerrone, but my thought process for this fight went kind of along the same journey. So I said in last week's video, I initially thought that Al Iaquinta would be a very good bet last week. Before I began my research, I was very, very convinced that Al Iaquinta would be a good bet. And if you actually would have asked me to debate that fight before I had a chance to do my research, I would have felt very strongly Iaquinta was the right bet, and I would have criticised anyone considering Cerrone. Then, like sometimes this happens sometimes, when I began my research, I actually did a complete 180. I completely flip-flopped, and then I felt Cerrone was the good bet, and that's why I recommended betting him, and he came through for us in a big way. And that is why, like I always say, research is so important. Tape study is so important, because your mind and your eyes will play tricks on you. You know, you can't really control what your memory recalls about fights, and a lot of the time when you go back and watch a fight in a cold light of day, you see it completely differently to how you remember it being when you watched it live. And, you know, based on hazy memories, I would have absolutely thought Iaquinta was going to beat Cerrone last weekend, but after watching footage of both guys, it was clear to me very quickly Cerrone had a huge advantage. And exactly the same things happened with this matchup. You know, if you would have asked me a few days ago who I thought would be a decent bet, I was very strongly considering Cannonier. But after researching this fight, after studying their recent fights, I'm actually considering Anderson Silva now, which I know sounds crazy, but hear me out and let me discuss how I see this fight in a little bit more detail. So, this one is an interesting fight, a very interesting fight, because if you go back and watch Anderson Silva's recent fights, you'll see that the first 2 rounds against Israel Adesanya were very, very competitive. If you watch the first 2 rounds of this fight, you could actually make a strong case that Silva and Adesanya were 1 round apiece going into the 3rd round, which meant whoever would have won the 3rd round would have won the fight 29-28. As it happens, the 2 out of the 3 judges, I believe, had Adesanya up 2 rounds going into the 3rd, so it wouldn't have mattered. But I believe 1 judge did have it 1 round apiece going into the 3rd round. The 2nd round in particular was very competitive, and Silva obviously beat Derek Brunson, and then caused Cormier some big problems in the 3rd round of this fight at UFC 200. And then obviously Silva almost beat Michael Bisping. He knocked him down, almost finished him, and it was just a weird overall performance from Silva, which is what I want to talk about a lot in this breakdown. But the point I'm trying to make is Silva's performances against Adesanya and Cormier, particularly Adesanya because it was so recently, it was only 3 months ago. This performance just proves to me that even at 44 years old, even at this stage in his career, Anderson Silva still has the technical ability to compete with some of the best fighters in the world. I mean, Anderson Silva really, really was competitive with Adesanya, which is crazy when you think of how good Adesanya is. You know, Silva had Adesanya struggling at moments in the 2nd round, and that's huge. That is absolutely huge, because Jared Cannonier is just a one-dimensional boxer, doesn't really throw any kicks, he's never going to try and take you down. And that is a style of fighting that Anderson Silva should absolutely thrive against. Cannonier is just a boxer. Silva doesn't have to worry about being taken down like he had to worry about against Daniel Cormier or Derek Brunson. He doesn't need to worry about what crazy unorthodox strikes Adesanya is going to uncork. Legs, knees, elbows, you know, the wide range of strikes Adesanya has to throw or frequently throws. You know, Silva's got to process all that, whereas with Cannonier, all he's really got to look out for is his power right or left hand. Admittedly, Cannonier does switch stances quite a bit, but a traditional boxing style shouldn't really cause Silva too much of a problem. He's very well equipped to deal with the style of fighting that Cannonier brings to the table, which makes this fight super, super, super interesting, because Anderson Silva's obviously the underdog. He's currently around about a 2.20 favourite, which is plus 120 for an implied probability of 45%. My only problem with Anderson Silva in this fight is that he is so, frustrating. He's just a very, 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 very frustrating guy. And he beats himself frequently. In order to bet on Anderson Silva, you need more than this. Because on any given night, he could just choose to, come out, not bother fighting, do cartwheels around the octagon, let his opponent hit him, do some crazy Wing Chun, and just let the fight slip away and lose a decision. So we know if you're capping an Anderson Silva fight, straight away you cannot give him a better than 50% chance of winning, because you never know if he's going to show up. So 50% of the time he's not going to show up and try and fight anyway. In fact, less than 50% of the time we see him show up and perform to his full potential. I mean, if we go through it, the first 2 rounds against Adesanya were very competitive, but then Silva did absolutely nothing in the 3rd round. He didn't throw any strikes. He basically gifted Adesanya the win. It wasn't because Silva was tired. Just for absolutely no reason, Silva stopped fighting in the 3rd round. Against Derek Brunson, this was a fight that Silva won, but he just let Derek Brunson hit him and outstrike him for no reason when it was clear Silva had the technical ability and the footwork and head movement and striking defense to avoid being hit, but he was letting Brunson tee off on him. Against Daniel Cormier, we know that Anderson Silva has good takedown defense. He's difficult to take down, but he kept giving up easy takedowns against Daniel Cormier and left it until the 3rd round to really get going and start to put Cormier in trouble. And then against Michael Bisping, you know, Anderson Silva basically KO'd Bisping, but let him off the hook. Decided to basically do nothing, just fuck around and dick around for the last 2 rounds of the fight and lose a decision. So it's very difficult to trust Anderson, which is the only reason why I'm not betting him here. Skill for skill, I think this is a very good stylistic matchup for Anderson. I think he can win this fight because Jared Cannonier has a very basic traditional boxing style that shouldn't cause Silva too much of a problem. We know Cannonier is going to walk forward and try and land his power hooks on Silva, but Silva is such an experienced striker. He lives in the matrix. He sees everything. Cannonier's style shouldn't cause Silva a problem, but I can't bet Silva at these odds because in order to get any value at the current odds around 2.20, that gives him an implied probability of 45%, which means to get any value on Silva at all, you have to give him a 50% or better chance of winning, and it's tough to get to that simply because he just chooses not to fight sometimes. He's a total dumbass. Now, what we do have to pay attention to is the fact that Anderson Silva does have home advantage on his side, which is huge in Brazil. So even if he does fuck around, I'm sure that when the crowd reacts to his antics, you know, that's going to maybe drive him or push him on to do better, to motivate him. You know, if the crowd are going crazy, that might also influence the judges to lean in Anderson's favour if the rounds do end up being like really weird and close. We also have to take into account the fact that Anderson Silva fucks around a lot and beats himself. You know, he didn't perform at his best in the 3rd round against Adesanya. You know, Silva, if 2 of those judges did have a 1 round apiece going into the 3rd round, Silva was very close to beating Adesanya, who's the current interim title holder. You know, Anderson Silva, if he would have fought to the best of his ability from the 1st round against Cormier, this fight could have got very interesting. Anderson Silva should have beaten Michael Bisping. He threw this fight away, he blew it. So bad fight IQ, stupid antics, and just randomness, random craziness has cost Anderson Silva fights that he should have won easily, or at least made more competitive than they turned out to be. So you have to question, this event, UFC 237, is taking place in Rio de Janeiro. There will be thousands and thousands of Brazilians in the arena on Saturday night who idolise Anderson Silva. He's going to be fighting in the co-main event after Brazilian legends like Nogueira and Thiago Alves and Jose Aldo have gone to war. The Brazilian fans are going to be pumped. Does Anderson Silva have it in him to disappoint? Does Anderson Silva has it in him to put in another flaky performance? Or will we finally see, after years of bullshit, Anderson show up and perform to the best of his ability for 3 rounds? Because at 44 years old, I know he's way past his prime. I know his reflexes are a little bit shot. I know his chin's not what he used to be. I know he's not as fast as he used to be. But he did have 2 very competitive rounds against Adesanya, and then for whatever reason chose to stop fighting in the 3rd round. If Silva shows up and fights for 3 rounds like he fought in the first 2 rounds against Adesanya, I think he beats Jared Cannonier. And with this fight being a big co-main event fight on a big pay-per-view in Brazil, in front of loads of Brazilian fans that absolutely idolise him, it is now or never. Is it possible that Anderson Silva does dumb shit again and goes out and loses a stupid decision? Or does he finally show up, give the fans what they want, let it all go for 3 rounds, and potentially put on a clinic against the very basic striker in Cannonier? Now, obviously, Cannonier hits very hard. It's very possible he could knock Anderson Silva out, but Silva definitely has the skills to deal with the traditional boxing style that Cannonier brings to the table. So when we look at this fight from a betting perspective, I don't want to bet Anderson Silva at these odds just because I don't trust him. He's just not trustworthy. He's chaos. He's absolute chaos. I need more value than this to take a gamble on Anderson Silva, because he's always going to be a gamble. At the implied probability of 45%, I need more. But if his odds were to improve just a little, up to around 2.40 or better, I would definitely bet Anderson Silva at those odds. He's not there yet, but who knows, he might get there. If we look at the way the odds have moved, he opened up at around about 2.90 to 2.80, and he was there for a decent amount of time. Obviously his odds have declined a lot since then, but you know, you never know. You never know. These big pay-per-view events, you see a lot of money coming on the fighters on fight day. You see a lot of odds movement. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on the odds on Anderson Silva, because 2.40, which is plus 140, isn't that far away from where he is at the moment at 2.20, which is plus 120. And I think at 2.40 to plus 140, he's a decent bet. I'm going to pass on his current odds because it's a little bit too close to even money for me, and with how unpredictable and chaotic and dumb Anderson Silva can fight sometimes, I don't see value there. But I definitely lean towards him here. I think he could show up and really blow Cannonier out the water. That's just how I see it, and if you go and research their past fights, you might see it too. But that is it for today's video, guys. I'll be back tomorrow breaking down another 3 fights from a betting perspective. Sorry we didn't find any bets from these fights, but fingers crossed the odds on Anderson Silva will improve as the week progresses. Remember, it's only Wednesday. Fights don't take place for another 3 days, so plenty of time to see some odds movement on these matchups. And remember, if you want that bonus Bellator 221 betting breakdown video that I'll put out on Saturday, hit the like button below. For every video I put out this week gets 300 likes, I will do that bonus video. But for now, guys, take care and I'll see you tomorrow.
Is this moment 21st century's yesterday. You can care all you want. Everybody does, yeah, that's okay, yeah. So slide away and give me a moment. Your moves are so raw. I've got to let you know. I've got to let you know. Tonight, 'cause I'm not sleeping. There's something about you, girl.